Harry Potter. I'm sure all of you have heard this if you click this video. If you haven't heard of it and you click this video, welcome to the video. My name is Cameron. I have been making videos on this channel about books and reading, and sometimes I'll read really popular series and recap them for you. So that's what we're doing today. I wanted to do Harry Potter because I have nothing but utter disrespect for the author. I do not think people should be buying her books new. So if I can do anything within my power to not have you guys reading or buying books, that's what I'm going to do. So basically we're going to do a big recap. This is kind of a video more meant for the people who have never picked Harry Potter up and don't really want to be left out, or for the people who have a lot of nostalgia for the series but feel personally a little icky about reading the books. Both things are very valid. I have felt both feelings regarding Harry Potter myself in my lifetime. What we are doing today. Today I'm going to recap the first 3 books for you. I have a lot of personal thoughts about this series. I'm going to try and interject my thoughts as little as I can. This is a 7-book series. It was primarily written in the 90s up to the early 2000s. It also had movies. The movies are a fine adaptation of the books. Also, if somehow this series gets, like my video series gets you interested in reading Harry Potter, please get them from your library or buy them secondhand. Cool? Cool. Alright, so we start out with the Sorcerer's Stone, or, in every other part of the world other than America, the Philosopher's Stone. I will be using those phrases interchangeably because I am an American and I grew up with sorcerers, but know that everywhere else it's philosophers. In the first chapter of the first book, The Philosopher's Stone, we are told about Vernon and Petunia Dursley, who are extraordinarily ordinary people, and their toddler son, Dudley. Basically, you see a day in their life, but that day is very strange. Vernon goes to work, and on his way to work he sees, like, a cat reading a map outside of his house, and he sees a bunch of owls everywhere, and he sees a bunch of strange people just around dressed very oddly, and they look like they're celebrating something. But the thing he does notice when he passes these people talking is he hears the name Harry Potter, which he recognizes as at least the last name of his wife Petunia's sister. He's like, that sounds weird. He goes home, he asks Petunia, hey, what's your nephew's name? And she's like, oh, Harry. It's like a boring name or whatever. But that is the name he hears out on the street. Vernon basically recognizes all of these things and is like, I'm going to ignore that because it inconveniences me. So that night, on the Dursley street, several individuals meet. First, we have a man named Albus Dumbledore. He arrives and puts out all the lights on the street, and he is approached by a woman called Professor McGonagall, who actually was first the cat that was sitting on the wall reading the map. And she turns into a very stern-looking woman, and they begin kind of talking about the events of the previous night. So everyone is kind of celebrating after 11 years of like kind of turmoil in this war that is now ended because you-know-who was defeated. McGonagall and Dumbledore kind of talk about how they've had 11 very long years that have finally come to the end with the death of you-know-who, which Dumbledore names as Lord Voldemort. Spoiler alert, you're gonna find out within 5 minutes. He's kind of the main baddie of the series, but he's dead! Woo! So McGonagall doesn't trust that Voldemort was actually defeated and still maintains that she wants to call him you-know-who. But Dumbledore is like, hey, the fear of a name is just going to increase the fear of the thing itself. You can call him Voldemort. And McGonagall is like, well, that's easy for you to say because you're like the one person that Voldemort was ever scared of. So they talk about that for a while, and then McGonagall changes the subject, and she's like, is it true what they say about Lily and James Potter? Like, are they dead? And did their son Harry survive? And Dumbledore confirms it for her. So McGonagall is really confused about how Harry, who is a toddler, I don't even think he's like technically toddler stage, like I think he's a little over a year old, but McGonagall is very confused how the darkest wizard of all time, Voldemort, was not able to kill him. And Dumbledore is kind of like, we may never know. We'll see, but we may never know, truly. So McGonagall then is like, hey, why have I been sitting outside these guys' house all day, talking about the Dursleys. She's like, I don't understand why you sent me to just hang out here and kind of watch this house. And Dumbledore is like, well, so I'm glad you asked. These are Harry Potter's only living family. At this point, it's his aunt and his uncle, and he's gonna come live with them. McGonagall is like, no, these people are like terrible. And Dumbledore is like, hey, I've written them a letter that's going to explain everything, and that, I mean, they have to take him. And McGonagall is like, these people are muggles, non-magical people. They are never gonna understand our world, they're never gonna understand Harry. But if that's what you are going to like say, what we're gonna go with, I'm rocking with you. So basically in this first chapter, you very much learn that like a lot of people are really ride or die for Dumbledore, including McGonagall. At that moment though, a giant man named Rubeus Hagrid arrives on a flying motorcycle with a baby in his arms. The baby is Harry Potter. He talks about how he arrived to pick up Harry and he got the motorcycle from a young man named Sirius Black. And he basically talks about how he found Harry in the rubble of a house. Whatever happened there has destroyed like half of the home. And he is totally fine with the exception of a scar in the middle of his forehead that looks like a lightning bolt. So Dumbledore, McGonagall, and Hagrid all leave Harry on his aunt and uncle's front porch with the letter kind of tucked up in the blanket, and they all leave, and Dumbledore turns the lights back on the street. The Dursleys find Harry in the morning. So about 10 years later, this is the third chapter, about 10 years later, we meet a little bit more of a grown-up Harry. He's 11 years old now. Oh, he's coming up on 11 years old now. He is very small for his age. He's got super unruly, messy hair. He wears these huge glasses. And he still has that lightning bolt scar. And the Dursleys are like hugely abusive to him. Like he lives and sleeps in the cupboard under the stairs. He is kind of an unusual kid. Like things happen to him all of the time that are pretty unexplainable. And he dreams a lot of bright green lights and flying motorcycles. And the Dursleys basically try to like squash every time he brings up something like that. They don't want him talking about it. They punish him for talking about it. How I mentioned there's like a lot of weird things, like unexplainable things that happen to Harry. For instance, when it is his cousin Dudley's 11th birthday. Dudley also bullies Harry terribly. He's so mean to him. But when it's Dudley's 11th birthday, they plan on going to the zoo. And the next door neighbor, Mrs. Fig, is unable to take care of and like watch Harry. So Harry actually gets to go to the zoo with the family, which is something he's never done before. And they're kind of wandering around the zoo and they're in the reptile enclosure. And he starts talking to the snake, like the snake talks to him, a large boa constrictor. Kind of is like, I was born in captivity, I've never seen South America, I would love to go see it. And Harry's like, man, that sucks, like I know what it feels like to be trapped. And Dudley is like, holy cow, Harry's getting this snake to talk, and runs up, and suddenly the glass of the enclosure vanishes. And the snake is able to get out and make its grand escape. So because of this incident, Vernon and Petunia basically are like, you're done. And they essentially lock him away for the rest of the summer, and he receives like a really harsh punishment, and like all he wants to do is be able to leave this household. So when this like months long punishment is over, it is finally kind of the summer vacation. Harry is finally kind of free to do whatever he wants, and one day he gets a letter in the mail that's addressed to him. Specifically, it says like, Mr. Harry Potter, the cupboard under the stairs, and then the address. And Vernon is like really freaked out by that. So what he does is he takes the letter, reads it, and is immediately like, we're done. Nope. And burns the letter before Harry gets the chance to read it. But Harry does get to move into his own bedroom for the first time since living with them. And the next day, they get another letter that says, Mr. H. Potter, the smallest bedroom. And so, once again, Vernon is like, oh my gosh, someone's watching us, someone knows what's going on. He burns the letter again. they start getting more and more letters. Letters that are specifically being delivered by owls. And eventually Vernon's like, we have to leave this house. We have to get out of here. But as they travel and they're stopping by like motels and like places to rest, they're still getting letters addressed to Harry at that location. So finally, Vernon is like, that's enough. And they go out to a shack on an island in the middle of the sea. It's actually the day before Harry's birthday when that happens. So he's kind of laying on the ground because they won't give him a bed. And he's like, oh wow, I'm almost about to turn 11. And when midnight strikes and Harry turns 11, the door is busted down by Hagrid, who has come to give Harry in person this letter that they've been trying to send him. And he also brings a little birthday present for Harry. He gets him a little treat, which is so cute. We love Hagrid. So Hagrid comes in and wishes Harry a happy birthday, and he's like, hey, I just came to see if you're like coming to Hogwarts. Like, we haven't gotten a response letter from you, just coming to check in. And Harry is like, what do you mean Hogwarts? What is that? Hagrid gets really mad at Vernon and Petunia because he's like, you haven't told Harry what he is. You haven't told him like what's going on or anything. They're like, of course not. We hate you guys. And Harry is very confused. He's like, what do you mean what I am? And Hagrid goes, well, Harry, you're a wizard. If you've ever seen that clip from the movie, that's that scene. But he's like, yeah, you are a wizard. Your parents were both wizards too. They got their education at Hogwarts, which is the British, like, wizarding school. So Hagrid tells Harry that his parents went to Hogwarts. They got their education. They are a witch and a wizard. And when Harry kind of mentions that, oh, the Dursleys told me that my parents died in a car accident, Hagrid gets upset and he's like, they definitely didn't die in a car accident. They were too good of wizards to die in a car accident. They were murdered by Lord Voldemort. Hagrid goes on to explain, yeah, Voldemort tried to kill you too, but somehow you survived. And no one really knows what happened there, but you're still alive today. So he's still alive today, and actually he's famous in the wizarding world because he is the first person to survive something like this, and the wizarding world all calls him like the boy who lived. And Vernon is like, well, it's too freaking bad. You're not going to that wizarding school. And he like basically insults a bunch of wizards, and he specifically insults like the insane person that is Albus Dumbledore, who is the headmaster of Hogwarts. So Hagrid, who's fiercely protective of Dumbledore, is like, you're not insulting Dumbledore on my watch, and like grabs the little umbrella that he's been carrying and basically casts a spell where Dudley grows a pigtail. So the Dursleys kind of run upstairs to hide while Hagrid is there. And Hagrid goes on to explain like, hey, yeah, I came to get you to make sure you were going. If you were going, we're gonna go pick up your school supplies. And then he also requests that Harry not mention that he just cast a spell because he's not allowed to use magic because he was expelled from Hogwarts in his 3rd year. But now he's been kept on to work as the gamekeeper. So the next day, Harry and Hagrid kind of go on this big trip to London. He specifically takes Harry to Diagon Alley, which is a road that's exclusively meant for wizards. It's through the entrance of the pub, the Leaky Cauldron. And while they're in the Leaky Cauldron, while they're passing through, a bunch of people see Harry and get very excited, and they're like, oh my gosh, it's the boy who lived. And he kind of has like a little celebrity moment and is kind of shocked to find out that like a lot of people know who he is. Like he stepped foot in this pub and everyone was like, Harry Potter. And then while he's in there, he also meets one of his future professors from Hogwarts, named Professor Quirrell. He is going to be teaching the Defense Against the Dark Arts class. But yeah, after that, after they go through the Leaky Cauldron, they have to go get gold from Harry's Gringotts vault. And Gringotts is the wizarding bank that's run by goblins, who all are described in a way that I don't think is very appropriate. They are basically Jewish stereotypes, but that's an aside. But yeah, so they go over to Gringotts and they go to Harry's vault first, and Harry finds out that his parents were kind of loaded, so he gets to get a lot of gold so he can buy his school supplies. And they also have to swing by Vault 713 to do the errand that Hagrid needed to do. And they go down to that vault, and there's just like one tiny little grubby package that Hagrid grabs. And when Harry asks him about it, he's like, I can't tell you. It's top secret business. I was sent here by Dumbledore. So anyway, they buy a bunch of supplies. He gets all of his stuff. While he is getting his school robes, because wizards all wear robes, he encounters kind of his first like taste of wizard racism when he sees a kid his age, like one who's going into his year at Hogwarts, and he's like, I can't believe Muggle-born people are allowed at Hogwarts. So he learns about that. He also learns that there is like a wizarding government called the Ministry of Magic, and it's headed up by the Minister of Magic, who is named Cornelius Fudge. Apparently, according to Hagrid, Cornelius Fudge sends letters to Dumbledore very often to be like, hey, can you help me with this? And then Harry also learns that there's a wizarding sport called Quidditch, and you ride it on brooms, and first years aren't allowed to have brooms, so he can't get a broom this year. Bummer. So that was kind of the day at Diagon Alley. They finish it by going to the wand shop where Harry has to get his wand, just like any other first year. And he's talking to Ollivander, who owns the shop, and they're kind of testing out wands, they're seeing what they're doing, and they finally pick out Harry's like perfect wand. I'm not going to explain all of the nature of like how wands are made in this universe, but the core of each wand has some magical item inside of it. And Harry's has a phoenix feather. Ollivander explains to him that like, that's really interesting because the phoenix feather inside here, the phoenix only ever gave 2 feathers for wands, and the twin wand is actually Voldemort's wand. So the twin wand with the other phoenix feather is the one that scarred Harry. Anyway, he's kind of like disturbed by that, but he goes out and Hagrid bought Harry an owl named Hedwig. So Hagrid also is like, hey Harry, term starts September 1st. Make sure you're at the King's Cross station in London. Yeah, so we kind of flash forward a month, and the Dursleys are not happy about this whole situation, but they do drop Harry off at King's Cross, and they basically just leave him there. They're like, you can deal with it yourself. But the instructions that Harry was given is he has to find platform 9 3/4 to locate the Hogwarts Express, which is the train that will take him to Hogwarts. Obviously, there's no 9 3/4 platform. So he's just kind of like wandering around. He's an 11-year-old boy wandering around with his little owl. But he overhears a family. There's a mom and 5 kids. They all have bright red hair. They're all dressed pretty shabbily. But he can hear the mother specifically talking about Muggles and Hogwarts and everything like that. So he approaches them and he's like, excuse me, do you guys know where platform 9 3/4 is? And the mom is like, yes, we do. My son Ron here, it's also going to be a first year. Yeah, so let's talk about the kids. They introduce themselves. They are the Weasleys. So you've got Mrs. Weasley. You've got the eldest brother Percy, who is a prefect, who's kind of like best in class, kind of has a little bit more authority over students.
Also, is that a standard thing in English schooling? Like, are prefects like normal things, or was that invented by like Harry Potter? Anyway, let me know.
And then you have the twins, Fred and George. Percy's in 5th year, they're in 3rd year. Ron is in 1st year. And Ginny, the one girl, is not old enough to go to Hogwarts yet, which she complains about in the book. But yeah, Harry basically kind of like sticks himself with that family, glues himself, and they go through the wall between platforms 9 and 10, and they are able to pass through, and there's platform at 9 3/4. Yippee. So Fred and George, the twins, kind of clock Harry immediately, and they're like, you have a scar on your forehead. Are you Harry Potter? And he's like, yes, I am. And they're like, very sick. And they kind of wander off. They're just like, we know this information now, he, because they're kind of pranksters. But Harry goes and like sits down on the Hogwarts Express, and Ron joins him, and they're kind of just talking. Ron is very self-conscious about his like homemade snack and his like really shabby robes and his pet rat Scabbers, who's also kind of crusty and old because like everything is hand-me-downs essentially in that family, because he not only has those 4 siblings that I mentioned, he also has 2 older ones that are like out of Hogwarts and working. Bill works with Gringotts, the wizard bank, he's the eldest, and Charlie, the second eldest, is a dragon tamer. So Harry is like, well, you were such a homie to me, I am going to get you some prizes when the treat cart comes around. So he buys a bunch of wizarding treats that he's never had before, and Ron kind of like explains them to him, and he gets specifically a candy called a chocolate frog, and Ron is like, hey, these have collectible trading cards if you want to start your own collection. And Harry's like, very cool. The first card he pulls is Albus Dumbledore. the headmaster, the one we've heard about or seen several times at this point. And it talks about how he's got all of these accolades. He's the headmaster of Hogwarts. He's got really high-ranking, like, positions in the Wizingamo, which whatever that is. And they also mention, like, he's invented and discovered things with his kind of alchemy partner, Nicholas Flamel. So they're riding along, they're having a good time. While they're talking about Bill and, like, his job, Ron is like, yo, did you hear Gringotts got broken into? According to Hagrid, Gringotts is the most notoriously, like, difficult bank in the world to break into because there's lots of, like, protective charms and stuff like that. And Ron is basically like, yo, did you hear that got broken into? And Harry's like, yo, that's crazy. And then they don't talk about it anymore. It'll come back up though. So while they're on the journey, another first year named Neville Longbottom swings by their compartment and is like, yo, have you guys seen a toad? My toad Trevor. Have you seen him? And they're like, no, sorry, man. So he moves on. A few minutes later, a girl, another first year, named Hermione Granger comes by. She's like, have you guys seen a toad? And they're like, no, we just told him we didn't see a toad. And at that moment, Ron is talking about a spell that Fred and George taught him. He's got his wand out, and Hermione's like, oh my gosh, are you gonna cast a spell? Let's see it. He tries, nothing happens, and Hermione's like, I don't think that's a spell. She also, during that time, mentions that she is Muggleborn. She has no experience in the wizarding world, and everything she knows about the wizarding world is based in just the books she's read. So she's a little bit of a bookworm, know-it-all kind of type. Yeah, she moves on. Then comes in that little racist boy from the rope shop that we talked about. His name is Draco Malfoy. And he kind of comes in with his friends Crabbe and Goyle, and he's basically like, oh, I met you before, you're Harry Potter. And he's like introducing himself, trying to like get in good with the famous guy. But he talks like a lot of crap about Ron. Like he talks about, oh, your parents have too many kids to afford, that's why you look so poor. And Harry immediately is like, yo, that's my one friend, absolutely not. And Harry is like, yeah, you better get moving. Like, get out of here. I don't want anything to do with you. So, the train arrives at Hogwarts, and the first years are all kind of escorted in. They ride across the lake, and they get to see the castle, and, like, it's very cool. Hagrid takes them. They are brought in for the sorting ceremony, where we see Professor McGonagall again, but they're brought in for the sorting ceremony. So there's 4 houses in this school. There's Gryffindor, which it has students defined by bravery. There's Hufflepuff, which has students defined by their loyalty. There's Ravenclaw, which has students that are intelligent, that are creative, that are insightful. And then there's Slytherin, which is the house that is defined by ambition. Harry, at this point, has been told several times by both Hagrid and Ron that, like, Slytherin is kind of the bad house. Like, there's never been a good guy who's come out of it. Like, they all end up being, like, these terrible, terrible villains. So they get in there, and the sorting ceremony is essentially they put on a little hat called the sorting hat, and the sorting hat, like, looks deep into their minds, and they go, ah, you have these characteristics, and sorts them. So, Harry goes up, he gets the hat placed on his head, and the sorting hat is like, I'm having a difficult time with you. You could either go into Gryffindor or Slytherin. And Harry's like, please don't put me in Slytherin. And the sorting hat is like, sick, I won't. Gryffindor. The sorting ceremony finishes, and along with Harry, Hermione, Neville, and Ron all get into Gryffindor, while Draco and his little buddies get into Slytherin. At the sorting ceremony, he sees Quirrell again, Professor Quirrell, the one he saw in Diagon Alley the day he went to, like, visit. He's kind of introduced to everything around him. Each house has a house ghost, so he meets the Gryffindor house ghost, Nearly Headless Nick. The name feels descriptive enough. He's nearly headless. He meets them, he meets a lot of his classmates. All of Ron's older brothers are in Gryffindor also, so he gets to hang out with them. And then he also gets to see, like, McGonagall, and he sees Hagrid sitting up at the main table, and he sees Professor Snape. And Professor Snape is, like, talking to Quirrell, but kind of glaring over at Harry, and whenever Harry and him, like, meet eyes, Harry's scar starts to hurt, which has never happened before. And Snape teaches potions, and McGonagall teaches transfiguration. During the welcoming feast, Dumbledore is talking, and he's like, hey, we got some rules. You're not allowed in the Forbidden Forest. There's a house cup, so whoever wins the most house points in the year, you get to win the competition between houses. after the feast, after the welcoming feast, they go up to the Gryffindor common room, which is guarded by a portrait of who they call the Fat Lady. And basically you just have to know the password, and you have to tell them the password, and then they'll let you in. So the other characters that aren't going to be relevant at this point, but I want you to know that they're introduced. You get introduced to Peeves, which is the castle poltergeist, and he basically just causes like a lot of problems all of the time, and he is very, very frightened of the Slytherin ghost, the Bloody Baron. And then you also get to meet the caretaker, kind of the guy who's in charge of like detentions and punishment and stuff like that, Mr. Filch, and he has a cat that also reports back to him called Mrs. Norris. So that's what you need to know about Hogwarts in the very first chapter within Hogwarts. So Harry kind of gets like a really big culture shift. Like he's either abused or totally neglected at his house, but once he comes to Hogwarts, everyone's like, holy cow, that's Harry Potter, world famous wizard who happened to not die when he was a toddler. So there's kind of a culture shift. But he finds that he really loves Hogwarts. He is having a great time. All of his first classes go well, with the exception of potions, taught by Professor Snape. He very clearly figures out that Snape just hates him. Snape wants absolutely nothing to do with him. He's constantly docking house points. And he basically goes, oh, Potter's a little celebrity. Rules are different for Harry Potter. This adult man is like fully bullying this child. That's an aside. But Hagrid sends Harry a letter and he's like, hey, why don't you come down for tea? And Harry takes Ron. And they're just kind of talking about their first week of classes. They're having a good time. But Harry finds out that Gringotts was robbed the day he was there. It was robbed right after he left. And the interesting part was, even though Gringotts was broken into, nothing was stolen. So Harry's like, that's really interesting. I wonder if it has to do with Vault 713 and the fact that we essentially emptied it. So while all this is happening, Harry and Malfoy have pretty much been like, we're enemies now. So they very quickly become like enemies. They are constantly arguing about stuff. Draco's constantly making fun of Harry. A bunch of stuff like that. But specifically, there is like a big moment, and it's during the first year's flying lessons. Earlier that day, Neville, who is like notoriously forgetful, gets a little magic item called a Remembrall, which just basically lights up whenever you forget something. He gets sent that by his grandmother, who knows he's forgetful. And Draco at one point snatches it, but a teacher, Madame Hooch, is like, give that back. When they first start flying though, Neville's broom kind of goes out of control and he flies really high up into the air and falls and breaks his wrist. So Madame Hooch has to escort him out, but Draco's like, aha, my moment, and grabs the Remembrall and like flies away, and he's like, come and get it, Potter. So Harry gets on his broom and finds out he's like a natural when it comes to flying on a broom. He's never done it before, but he's like really, really good. And he catches up to Draco immediately, and Draco's like, catch, and like throws the Remembrall. And Harry makes like a really amazing save, but he's stopped when Professor McGonagall, who is the head of Gryffindor, by the way, sees him and is like, Potter, get over here now, and like takes him out of class. Harry thinks he's gonna get detention or he's gonna get expelled, and he's like freaking out, but McGonagall goes and gets an older, like a 5th year student named Oliver Wood. And they're like, Harry, you should be our seeker. And Harry's like, I thought first years weren't allowed to do this. And McGonagall was like, I'll make an exception because you're actually really stinking good. Also, your father was a Quidditch player. And Harry's like, oh my gosh, my dad. So he gets added onto the Quidditch team. He is also the youngest seeker in a century. Malfoy, who thinks Harry is gonna get expelled for this, is really upset when he sees Harry the next day and basically was like, you know what, you, me, midnight, we're gonna have a wizard's duel in the trophy room. And Harry's like, bet, it's on, and brings Ron along. They are like sneaking out to go to this wizard's duel, and Hermione sees them and is like, you guys cannot be doing, like, you guys shouldn't do this. And they're like, whatever, Hermione, and she follows them out of the portrait hole, but the fat lady's not there, so when it shuts, it locks her out. While the three of them are out there, Neville is also out there because he's forgotten the common room password. And so Ron and Harry were like, whatever, we're going to this wizard's duel anyway. And Hermione and Neville are like, well, we can't stay out here, so we're gonna go with you. So they get down to the trophy room, and when they get there, they hear Mr. Filch looking for students, because very clearly Malfoy has tipped him off that there will be students there at midnight that night. So they all go run and hide. When they run and hide, they just kind of run into the first unlocked room that they can, like shut the door behind them, and when they turn around, there is a massive 3-headed dog growling and like trying to bite them. So of course they like freak out and run back up to the common room. And this is where Hermione says her fairly iconic line of, "We could have been killed, or worse, expelled," because she's a know-it-all. She's a goody two-shoes know-it-all. She also is like, did you guys not see what that thing was standing on? Because it was definitely standing on a trapdoor. So that's where all of them are like, oh, so they're hiding something. Interesting. And at this moment, Harry's like, maybe that's where the thing that Hagrid got from Gringotts is, because Hagrid mentioned that the only place safer than Gringotts is Hogwarts. So Harry is sleuthing. He's immediately like, whoa, the dots are connecting. So the next day, Hermione is like really pissed at the boys. She doesn't want anything to do with them, but the boys are both like, whatever, she's an annoying know-it-all anyway. And Harry also gets taken down to his first Quidditch practice with Oliver Wood, I'll just call him Wood, who explains like how Quidditch works. There are 3 types of balls. There is a quaffle, which is kind of like a soccer ball. It's the ball you use to score points. It is handled by 3 chasers, which is a playing field. So they're basically like the soccer players running around and, well, flying around on their brooms trying to score goals. The second type of ball is a bludger. There are 2 bludgers on a field. The bludgers kind of have their own mind. Their entire purpose is to go after players and try to knock players off their brooms. And then there are 2 players called beaters that carry bats around. They either have to fire the bludgers at the other team, or they have to keep the bludgers away from their own teammates. And then the final ball is the snitch, and it's just this tiny little ball. It is specifically relevant to the game because once it's caught, it earns the person who catches it 150 points and it finishes the game. And this ball is exclusively watched for and chased by the Seeker, which is the part that which is the position Harry is playing. So Seekers are really important to the game because even though they don't necessarily score all of the points, they are the thing that finishes the game. I hope that makes enough sense. But anyway, it really is not relevant except for the 3 chapters of book where it is. But yeah, 7 players a team, and Harry is the Seeker. And in order for him to play, Harry had to be delivered a new broom. And he got a really nice newest model, amazing broom, blah blah blah, a Nimbus 2000. And Hermione is deeply upset that Harry broke the rules and still ended up getting a broomstick. She feels like he got rewarded even though he's breaking rules, and she doesn't necessarily agree with that. And kind of has been giving Harry and Ron a hard time. And in Charms class, taught by Professor Flitwick, which I don't think ever becomes plot relevant, but the more you know, Ron and Hermione are paired together, and he is not getting this levitating spell, and she corrects him and gets it on the first try, and so he gets really mad, and he's complaining about her and being well, no wonder she has no friends, she's such an annoying, lousy know-it-all. Hermione overhears that and gets really, really upset and kind of runs off crying, and Harry and Ron both kind of feel really bad about it, but they have other things to think about because it's Halloween and they have a big Halloween feast that they have to go to. So they go to their next class and Hermione isn't there, and then they go to the feast and Hermione isn't there. And they're like, oh man, now we feel bad about this. But in the middle of that feast, Professor Quirrell, who is a deeply nervous man, deeply nervous guy, he talks with a stutter, he runs into the Great Hall and is like, there's a troll in the dungeon, just so you know, and passes out. And everyone is holy cow. And so Dumbledore is everyone go back up to your common rooms, we'll go ahead and deal with this and then we'll come back down for the feast. Everyone heads upstairs, but Harry and Ron are but what about Hermione? And someone is at one point in the day is oh, she was crying in the dungeon bathroom. So Harry and Ron are uh-oh, Hermione's down in the dungeon, we have to go get her. So these 2 11-year-old kids who know virtually no spells go down to the dungeon to try and warn Hermione about it. As Ron and Harry head down to the dungeon, they see Snape heading in the direction of where like the door with the three-headed dog is, and they're like, that's suspicious, that's weird. And they get there, and Hermione's already been cornered by this troll. So the boys do something insane, and Harry runs up and jumps on the back of the troll with like his wand in his hand and sticks the wand up the troll's nose. And the troll is so surprised it drops its club, and Ron, using what Hermione taught him earlier that day, uses the levitating spell to lift up the troll's club and drop it on its head, essentially knocking it out. And they basically save Hermione off of sheer dumb luck. All of these professors show up and they're like, what the heck are you guys doing? And Hermione is like, it's my fault. I thought I learned enough in these classes to take it on myself, and I stupidly came down here and tried to do it. She like lies to a teacher, which is crazy because she's been giving the boys such a hard time for breaking the rules. Now she's breaking the rules. But McGonagall is like, okay, Hermione, that was dumb. We're gonna take 5 points away from Gryffindor. But Harry and Ron, for using really good thinking, you each get 5 points for Gryffindor. And yeah, from that point on, like, Hermione and Ron and Harry are kind of like a trio. Like, you can't really defeat a monster like that and not be, like, bonded for life. So, a few days later, the trio kind of sees Snape and they see he's limping around. Which, once again, that's suspicious, that's weird. And Harry is like, I think he went after that dog. Like, I think that dog got him. And when they see he's, like, limping, Harry's reading a library book, and Snape's like, you're not allowed to have that outside of the castle, because they're sitting by the lake, and, like, takes it from him. And so Harry goes to Snape's office later to be like, hey, can I have my book back? And that's where he sees, like, Filch cleaning a giant bite wound on Snape's leg, which in Harry's brain is like, oh, so he definitely went after the dog. He kind of like brings us up to Ron and Hermione, and Hermione's like, he's a teacher. I can't imagine he's like trying to steal from the school. And Ron's like, nah, Harry, I'm rocking with you. I get it. So the book that Harry was reading that got taken away was Quidditch Through the Ages, because his first Quidditch game arrives. And in the middle of the game, Harry's broom starts going like crazy, like it's cursed. It's trying to knock him off, and he's like barely holding on. And Ron and Hermione are like looking around, and they see Snape, who's like maintaining eye contact with the broom and like muttering under his breath. They're like, oh my gosh, Snape is cursing it. So they run over, and Hermione lights his robes on fire, which breaks the curse. And Harry is able to get back up on his broom, and he catches the snitch very shortly after, because he kind of falls into it and catches it in his mouth. But yeah, they win the game for Gryffindor. So after the game, the trio goes to visit Hagrid, and they're like, hey, Snape really suspicious. Like, he's got a bite wound because he saw that three-headed dog. And Hagrid's like, oh, Fluffy, my dog? And everyone's like, Fluffy is your dog? And he's like, yeah, I love creatures. I don't think he explicitly says that, but like one of Hagrid's most persevering traits is he just loves little guys, essentially, or big guys that are kind of dangerous. But they think he's suspicious, and Hagrid's like, no, Snape is trustworthy, Dumbledore trusts him, so I trust him. And then they were talking about the dog, and they're like, we saw that the dog was standing on a trapdoor, what's he guarding? And Hagrid's like, that's not your business, that's between me, Dumbledore, and Nicholas Flamel. And Harry's like, Nicholas Flamel? I know that name. But Hagrid is refusing to tell them anymore because he accidentally said the name Nicholas Flamel. So after they hear that name, the kids are like, we have to figure out who Nicholas Flamel is, because Harry is like, I have heard that name before. So they spend like a lot of time researching it. So Christmas time kind of arrives, and Hermione's like, hey, I'm going home, like you guys need to look into Nicholas Flamel more. Ron and his family are staying because their parents are going to visit Bill, who is currently working in Egypt. So Ron and Harry just kind of hang out. Ron teaches Harry wizard's chess, which is just chess, but you tell the players what to do and they move for you. Ron's very good at it. But they're just kind of hanging out and doing a little bit of research. But on Christmas Day, Harry and Ron get their gifts, and Harry specifically gets a cloak from a person who does not like sign the note and is like, hey, this was your father's, use it well, essentially is what the note says. And Harry's like, what is this? And he puts it on, and it's an invisibility cloak. And they're like, oh, interesting. And they're like, you know what we can use this invisibility cloak for? We can use this to look in the restricted section of the library. You can use this to, like, look at the books without needing a teacher's note. So the next night, he sneaks out with the invisibility cloak and, like, starts looking around the library, but he opens a book that starts screaming. And so Filch is alerted, and he's like, gotta get out of here. So he sneaks out. He's nearly caught by Filch and Snape, who's out and, like, wandering about suspiciously, as he does, because everything he does is suspicious. And Harry kind of, like, ducks into the first room he finds. When Harry gets in there, all he sees in that room is a mirror. And he's like, interesting. And he walks over. In that mirror, he sees his reflection and both of his parents, like, over his shoulders. And some more family members around them. And Harry's like, whoa, this is crazy. These are, like, my parents. This is the first time I've, like, seen my parents. But he knows it's them because everyone keeps telling him that he looks exactly like his father, but he has his mother's eyes. And you know what? They're right. Yeah, so he kind of, like, spends time with the mirror. And the next day, he's like, Ron, you have to check this out. Like, you can see my family. And Ron, being a supportive friend, is like, oh, that's sick. Yeah, I'll come see. And so they sneak out again. So they look at the mirror again, and Ron is like, I don't see your family. And Harry's like, what do you mean? Ron is like, I am older, I'm holding the Quidditch cup and the house cup, I'm a prefect, like, I'm like the best, essentially. And Harry's like, that's really weird. Harry spends the next several nights just returning to look at the mirror, and on the final night, he arrives and is looking at the mirror, and Dumbledore is like, hey, what's up? Because Dumbledore's seen him doing this, and is like, what you doing, pal? And Harry's like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. This mirror has my parents in it, and I just wanted to look at them. Dumbledore is, like, talking to him, and he's like, yeah, because the mirror shows your greatest desire. Your greatest desire is that you have a family again. Ron's greatest desire is that he's not just one of his own brothers. He wants to be better than the rest. And he's like, hey, just so you know, this mirror is going to be moved after tonight. Please don't go looking for it. And Harry, kind of in a moment, is like, what do you see in the mirror? And Dumbledore's like, I see myself getting socks, because no one ever gets me socks for gifts, they only get me books. And later Harry's like, okay, so I think that was a deeply personal question, and I think Dumbledore was lying to me. The second Quidditch game comes around. Obviously Christmas is finished. They're now playing their second Quidditch game. And now everyone's back at the school, and Snape has offered to referee. And Harry's like, oh no, we're gonna lose this game because Snape is refereeing. No. And Harry is, like, deeply stressed out. Ron and Hermione are like, you need to bow out of this game. And Harry's like, they literally have no backups. I cannot. In the meantime, like, prepping up to this game, Malfoy has really started going after Neville. He's, like, bullying poor Neville so much, and Neville is, like, so deeply upset about it. And the trio is like, Neville, you're worth, like, 5 of Draco. Like, that guy sucks. You're rad, though. They kind of are, like, trying to comfort him, and they're like, here's a chocolate frog. And Neville has his little chocolate frog, and he's like, hey, I don't collect these cards, but if you guys do, here you go. And he gives the card back to Harry, and it's Dumbledore's card again. And that's where Harry remembers that's where he saw the name Nicholas Flamel, is because Dumbledore and Flamel worked on alchemy projects together. And Hermione is immediately like, Nicholas Flamel alchemy, hold on, and brings, like, this massive book down, and they, like, are reading through it, and she's like, Nicholas Flamel is the inventor of the Philosopher's Stone. And it says, the Sorcerer's Stone brings, like, unending riches to the person who has it, and it also produces the elixir of life, which allows people to live forever. Nicholas Flamel himself is almost 700 years old. They don't really have proof of this, but they were like, Hagrid specifically mentioned Nicholas Flamel. We're gonna guess that's what was brought to Hogwarts to be protected, the Philosopher's Stone. And then they're like, why is Snape going after the Sorcerer's Stone? On the day of the second Quidditch game, now that it finally comes around, Dumbledore comes to see the game, which immediately makes Harry be like, okay, Snape is not gonna try anything while they're there. So Harry is playing his little game, and Malfoy comes up to Neville and starts bullying him and Ron again. Neville's like, I'm worth 5 of you, Malfoy. And Malfoy's like, literally, what does that mean? And then the 3 of them, plus Crabbe and Goyle, start a fight, and they're, like, fighting in the stands. And Harry catches a snitch again, which wins Gryffindor their second game. And he also wins it within 5 minutes, which everyone's like, that's amazing. He's the youngest seeker ever. Whoa. So after the Quidditch game, everyone kind of leaves the field. Harry kind of hangs back to just fly around more and just kind of hang out. But when he's putting his broom up, he sees Snape walking into the Forbidden Forest. You know, the forest that students aren't allowed in. And he's like, I gotta follow him. He's suspicious. And he follows him to the Forbidden Forest and, like, basically comes across him and Professor Quirrell having a conversation. And Snape is, like, confronting Quirrell about something. And he's like, Quirrell, have you figured out how to get past the dog yet? And Quirrell's like, I don't want you as an enemy. I'm so nervous. I'm stuttering. And Snape is like, yeah, you don't want me as an enemy. And then leaves. And Harry goes and tells Ron and Hermione, and they're like, ooh, that's weird. And they're like, if Quirrell is, like, holding some sort of, like, thing, like, we don't think he's gonna last super long. And they're, like, really concerned for him. So, after a little bit of time, they're seeing Quirrell grow a little bit more sickly. He doesn't yield, though, it seems like. I mean, he's still around, and Snape is still a grumpy, suspicious man. And they're like, interesting. One day, the boys are in the library doing a little bit of research, and Hagrid comes up. And he's like, you guys still looking for Flamel? And they're like, oh, we found Flamel, like, months ago. And we know what the dog is guarding. It's the Philosopher's Stone. And Hagrid's like, don't mention it here. Come down to my hut. And they see he checks out a book, and they're like, what the heck? And they check it out, and he checked out a book about dragons, and, like, raising and breeding dragons. And they're like, that's weird. Dragons, you're not allowed to keep dragons as pets. So they and Hermione go down to the hut, and Hagrid is like, yes, my three-headed dog Fluffy is guarding the stone. But you can't get it, because each of the teachers, each of, like, the 7 main teachers have set up a trap, or, like, a test to get through. So even if you were to get in there, you would have to go through a bunch of tests. So as they're, like, talking about this, they are like, Hagrid, it's really hot in here. Like, you need to, like, open a window. And he's like, no, don't. Because he is using his stovetop to heat a dragon egg. Something he's definitely not allowed to have. And they're like, Hagrid, where did you get this? And he's like, oh, there was, like, a hooded man at the bar that I was at the other day. And we were just kind of, like, hanging out, and I told him I was interested in dragons, and he had one, so he gave it to me. And they're all like, okay. They spend the next, like, several days and weeks, like, coming down to visit Hagrid as, like, the egg is hatching, and the egg finally hatches, and one day they're down there, and they see Draco Malfoy looking through the window. So they know Draco is going to rat Hagrid out. So they have to come up with a plan to get rid of the dragon. The dragon's name is Norbert. Hagrid named him. Anyway, they write to Ron's second eldest brother, Charlie, who we remember is a dragon tamer. And they're like, hey, can you pick up this dragon? And Charlie's like, I've got some friends that are going to be in town. They can bring the dragon. You need to meet my friends at the top of one of the highest towers to give that to them. They are, like, exchanging letters about it. Draco steals one of their books at one point that has a letter, like, talking about the plan. And they're like, oh no, but it's okay, we have the invisibility cloak. At one point, though, before this plan, Ron gets bitten by the dragon, and has to go to the hospital wing inside the castle. And so Harry and Hermione have to do this instead. So, Harry and Hermione go and take care of it. They wear the invisibility cloak up. They're able to successfully smuggle Norbert out of the building. And on their way up, they also see Draco getting busted for being out of bed in the middle of the night. And they're like, yes, everything has gone perfectly. And they come back downstairs, and McGonagall catches them because they left the invisibility cloak at the top of the tower. Neville also got out of bed to, like, warn them, like, hey, Malfoy's coming to get you. Like, I heard him. Neville also gets caught. So the 3 of them get caught. They each lose 50 points for Gryffindor in that night, and they're all given a detention. Draco also loses 50 points for Slytherin and gets a detention. So the next day, everyone's like, what the heck happened? Gryffindor was winning, and they find out that those 3 are, like, the 3 problem children, and they're basically shunned by the rest of the school for that. So the 4 of them, Harry, Neville, Hermione, and Malfoy, all go to their detention, which is held in the Forbidden Forest. Hagrid is, like, taking care of them. Hagrid and his boarhound, Fang. And they're like, okay, so tonight's detention, something's been killing unicorns in these woods. And we need to find out what's doing it. Hagrid is like, I'll take Harry and Hermione. Fang can go with Malfoy and Neville. And we'll split up and we'll start looking around. So they're wandering, and they come across some centaurs, and the centaurs are like, what are you guys doing here? And they're like, we're looking for the thing that's killing unicorns. And the centaurs are like, okay, cool. we'll mind our own business. But Neville sends off kind of the signal that's like, we're in danger right now, and they have to go get them. And it turns out Draco's just kind of snuck up behind Neville and really scared him, so he sent off, like, the signal that was like, help me. So, Hagrid's pissed, and Hagrid's like, alright, Neville, you're coming with me and Hermione. Harry, go with Fang and Draco. So they're walking around. Harry and company stumble upon a unicorn body, which has like just been freshly killed. And they also see like something very spooky bending over it and drinking its blood. And Harry's scar immediately starts like burning big time. Fang and Malfoy run off. And so Harry's left alone with this thing. But this thing gets chased off by one of the centaurs they encountered, called Firenze. And Firenze is like, come with me, I'll take you to safety. And also explain some lore to you. He tells him that drinking unicorn blood keeps people alive no matter what. But there's like really grave consequences because unicorns are like very wholesome, pure creatures, and like killing something that innocent is going to have like real consequences. And he also is talking to Harry and he's like, I suspect that thing that's been killing unicorns and drinking their blood is after something a little more powerful to keep them alive. And Harry's like, the Philosopher's Stone. And Firenze is like, do you know something that's that evil to kill a unicorn? Because he's like, I know exactly who's killing these unicorns. And Harry's like, oh my god, it's Voldemort. So he's just come across Voldemort for the first time very casually. So they get back, their detention is served. Harry tells Ron and Hermione kind of what he saw. But Hermione is like, isn't Dumbledore the only guy that Voldemort is scared of? Like, it seems weird for Voldemort to be making moves like this close to Dumbledore. Like, I don't think Voldemort would actually try anything while Dumbledore was here. And Harry and Ron are like, okay, good point. They go back up to their dorm, and Harry sees his invisibility cloak sitting on his bed with like a little note that's just like, just in case. So someone's returned it to him. We're at the end of the year now. Exams are finished. Harry is still like pretty concerned about this whole thing though. I mean, as he should be. There's been a lot of like very sketchy activity going on, but he's still very concerned. So he's like, I have to talk to Hagrid. And he goes to Hagrid and he's like, hey, here's a question. That hooded figure that gave you that dragon egg, did he want anything in exchange for that? And Hagrid's like, no, we just kind of sat and talked about some other creatures that I've like taken care of. Like, we talked about this, we talked about Fluffy, and like, I talked about how Fluffy will go to sleep anytime there's any music, and Harry's like, whoa, you told that to like a stranger? And Hagrid's like, oh yeah, I probably shouldn't have said that. And Harry is like, oh my gosh, Snape knows how to get through Fluffy. That was like the last thing holding him back. He's gonna make some moves. And once again, Hermione and Ron are like, yeah, but Dumbledore's still here. So they're walking upstairs because they're like, we have to tell someone though that he's gonna like make a move for this. And they get upstairs and they're like, where's Dumbledore? And McGonagall is like, oh, he just got like an urgent letter from the Ministry of Magic. He's out of the castle right now. And Harry is like, Snape is making a move tonight. And so they're like, well, we have to take matters into our own hands. We have to like take care of this. So that night they wait till everyone goes to bed and they get up and they're like leaving. And when they go down there, Neville is there. And Neville is like, you guys cannot lose any more points for Gryffindor. Like, we can barely handle this. I need you guys to, like, go back upstairs. And they're like, Neville, we cannot. And sweet little Neville is like, well, I'll fight you. I'll fight you so you don't go down there. And Hermione is like, buddy, I'm so sorry. And basically, like, petrifies him and, like, freezes him in place so he can't stop them. So they all go down there. And they go to Fluffy's room. And they start playing him, like, a little bit of music so he goes to sleep so they can jump down the trapdoor. I mentioned there were 7 tests, so let's kind of like go through and break down each of them. The first test that they have that was set up by the herbology professor, Professor Sprout, is a type of plant that starts like ensnaring them and like choking them and stuff like that. And they remember like, oh, this is a plant that's defeated by light. So they cast a little light spell. They get through that pretty easily. The second test is a bunch of charmed keys with wings set up by Professor Flitwick, who I mentioned. And they basically have to pick out which key goes in the keyhole and go get it. which Harry successfully does because he's got those seeker eyes. So they catch it, they put it in the little lock, and they move on to the next room. The third test is Professor McGonagall's, and they have to play wizard's chess, which Ron is very good at. It's like a giant wizard's chessboard, and they basically have to play their way across the room. So Ron plays an amazing game and ends up sacrificing himself, gets like hit by the other players so that he can't move on. And Hermione and Harry move on to the next room. The next room is a room with a big troll, but the troll's already been knocked out, so they're like sick. That's already been dealt with for us. And then the final room is a room with like 9 potions laid out, and they basically have to figure out which one will send them through to the next room or which one will send them back. Some of the bottles are poison, some of them are harmless, stuff like that. Hermione figures it out because she's a smarty pants, and is like, I'll go back and get Ron and like try to get Dumbledore back here as quick as possible. And Harry's like, I'll move on to the next room and confront Snape. Harry moves on to the next room without anybody. And when he gets in there, he finds, first of all, he finds the mirror that he was looking at in that room that got moved. He finds that, but he specifically finds Quirrell, Professor Quirrell, in there being like, I have to get this thing. And Harry's like, oh shoot, I was wrong the whole time. And Quirrell is like, I tried to kill you at your first Quidditch match, but Snape was counterspelling me. And I broke concentration because Hermione knocked me over when she went to go light Snape's robes on fire. Snape also like went out of his way to referee the next game so that Quirrell wouldn't try to do that again. Because Snape has been on to Quirrell the whole time. If we haven't already figured that out, Snape's been on to Quirrell the whole time. So the night that the troll was in the dungeon, which Quirrell is like, I let that troll into the dungeon, Snape headed to Fluffy's room because he knew Quirrell was going to try to like make a move, and he like kind of headed him off. And that's how Snape got bit. And then Harry is like, but I thought Snape hated me. And Quirrell's like, oh, Snape hates you. Let's be very clear. He has a lot of beef with your dad specifically, but he also hates you because of it. But he didn't try to kill you. Anyway, I was just trying to serve my master, Voldemort. So, because the only item in the room is the mirror is called Erised, which is so silly because Erised is like desire backwards. So it's the mirror of desire. Harry is like, my greatest desire right now is to find the stone so that Quirrell can't. And Quirrell is like, I want the stone immediately. Why can't I get it? So he brings Harry over and he's like, what do you see? And Harry feels like the stone drop into his pocket, but he's like, I see myself as the Quidditch captain. And they're like, okay, so that's not helpful. Quirrell goes back to doing his thing, and then they hear a voice that's like, let me talk to the boy. And Quirrell's like, you're not strong enough though, master. Voldemort's like, no, I'm gonna talk to him. So Quirrell takes off his turban, and on the back of his head is Voldemort's face. Like, they've been sharing a body the whole time. And Voldemort's like, so you're a dirty liar to Harry. But they know he has the stone. So they go, and they're like, we're gonna get you now. And when they, like, reach to go get him, when Quirrell reaches to go get him, touching Harry, like, burns his hands. Quirrell is like, I can't touch Harry. And Voldemort's like, too bad, get him. And so Harry's like, wait, my touch is burning him. And, like, grabs his face. And it's so painful for Harry that he eventually passes out, but right before he passes out, he feels someone pull Quirrell off of him. He's unconscious for like 3 days, and he wakes up in the hospital wing with Professor Dumbledore. Dumbledore is like, well, nobody knows what happened down there with you, so naturally, like, the whole school knows. So Harry is being, like, treated like a hero. He's got lots of presents besides his hospital wing bed and stuff like that. And Dumbledore does tell him that he missed the final Quidditch game, which means Gryffindor lost. Harry's like, what happened with everything? Like, did Voldemort get the stone? Dumbledore is like, no, Quirrell didn't get the stone. Quirrell's actually dead, which is crazy that 11-year-old Harry Potter killed him. And he also says the stone has been destroyed, and Flamel and his wife are kind of getting their affairs in order before they pass away after being alive for 700 years. Because Harry is now in a situation where it's just him and Dumbledore, he's like, hey, why did Voldemort try to kill me in the first place? But he asks that because Voldemort, during their confrontation, is kind of like, Voldemort says he only killed Harry's mother because he was trying to get to Harry, and if she hadn't stood in the way, like, she wouldn't have died. And so Dumbledore is like, I can't answer that question for you yet. He's like, I can't answer that question for you yet. Harry is like, okay, so explain to me why Quirrell couldn't touch me. Dumbledore is like, well, your mother, in an act of love and trying to protect you, dying for you, essentially casted like a protection over you. An act of like true love like that is unfathomable to Voldemort, who is an entity that cannot love. And so touching something that is made of like pure love hurts him. Dumbledore is like, but I do think we need to keep an eye out because Voldemort survived that first time. I think he's survived again. Like, I think he's still alive. And then after he leaves, Hagrid comes by the hospital wing and is like, hey, I got this gift for you. I wanted to give it to you. And it's a photo album of his parents and like a bunch of their friends, because Hagrid's like, I wrote to a lot of their like school time friends to see if they had pictures, and so I made this photo album for you. But yeah, so, and also wizard photos like move, so he gets to like see his parents moving and stuff like that, which is like a cool experience for him. But yeah, so Harry gets better. He's cleared to go to the final feast, which Slytherin has won the house cup, and Dumbledore's giving a speech and he's like, before we like officially crown the champions, I have some final points to give out. He gives 50 to Ron, 50 points to Ron for playing the best game of wizard's chess that Hogwarts has ever seen. He gives 50 to Hermione for remaining like really cool-headed and applying logic, which is not like a thing that most wizards are good at, to like problems to solve them. He gives 60 to Harry for obviously defeating Voldemort. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, Gryffindor's tied with Slytherin now, blah, blah, blah. And then he gives 10 points to Neville for having the courage to stand up for what he believes is right, even if he's standing up against his friends. But yeah, Gryffindor wins the cup for the first time in many years. And Harry returns to the Dursleys for the summer. And he's looking forward to the next year. So, that is the Philosopher's Stone. I'm gonna stop filming today though because the sun is setting. Hi. Okay, this is editing Cameron. It's good to see you. Sorry the ending of this video was abrupt. I did not realize I was going to talk for so long. I tried to make it as detailed as I could, but I ended up talking for a lot longer. So this video is not gonna be the first 3 books. We're gonna do 1 book at a time. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you enjoyed this video. It was edited by my darling sister Ellie, so compliment nice things towards Ellie. If you enjoyed any part of this video, the only reason this video has a little bit of humor is because she's funnier than me. So anyway, but yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm currently in the process of moving, so you're probably not going to see book 2 for a while, probably not until March. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you all later. Bye!